My name is Andrea. I will be your host moderator for this evening. We are Juris Education. With me, I have Era and Mika, who will be introducing themselves momentarily. Tonight's discussion and tonight's topic is the ultimate last-minute law school application checklist. I dare you to try and say that 3 times fast. What does tonight's conversation look like? Okay, that's always the number one question. That's where this slide comes in. We're looking at running this webinar for about 45 minutes to an hour. The majority of it will be a conversation where we discuss the necessary components, personal statement polishing, resume refinement, recommendation letters, final application checks, et cetera, et cetera. And we actually have various opportunities throughout the course of the webinar for a Q&A. So please, just like you put your locations in the chat and share a little bit about where you're from, don't hesitate to use the chat to ask those questions. No question is too big or too small, and our wonderful panelists here will do their absolute best to try and answer them, of course, to the best of their ability. With that being said, I want to just take a really quick moment. I promise you it's quick, to share a little bit about who we are, because you might not necessarily know who we are or what makes us the experts in this particular field. As mentioned earlier, we're Juris Education. We're a globally recognized law school admissions consulting firm, offering comprehensive support from test prep to law school admissions and even bar exam tutoring. With a 94% acceptance rate, our students gain entry into the top law schools in the United States. Last cycle alone, our T14 acceptance rate was 34%, which is something we're incredibly proud of. That is actually almost 6 times higher than the national average of 5.7%. So again, something we're very proud of, and goes to show you we're passionate about this and we love what we do. In terms of a little bit more about who we are, we believe in starting the law school application process as early as possible. So for our college sophomores, because I know we have some sophomores on this call, we offer pre-law advising and profile development. This focuses on building each student's professional cover letter and resume to highlight their most meaningful experiences and elevate their profile. To help candidates stand out, we assist in enhancing transcripts and GPA, identifying organizations and internships, creating a timeline for LSAT and application prep, and pinpointing specific areas of interest. Our goal is to help students gain a strong foundation and understand what schools are really looking for while building a portfolio that sets them apart from other applicants. While our counselors support students in their profiles, we have awesome LSAT coaches who work closely with them to provide personalized one-on-one tutoring. Now, students take an official LSAT diagnostic test so tutors can assess their strengths and weaknesses. This helps create a custom study plan structured for the days, weeks, and months ahead. We tailor our approach to each student's unique needs and schedule, providing the right assessments and lessons as they become familiar with the test content, strategies, and format. Intern tips monitor and track progress, allowing us to modify study plans and build an upward trend leading to the official test date. On average, we see a 12-point increase for 45 plus hours of tutoring, and we offer a 165 plus LSAT score guarantee with our 60-hour program. Once we've helped shape an outstanding candidate, we support in creating the perfect application. Law schools review applications holistically. Both Aaron, and Mika will tell you this, very important to note. And we assist with every step of that process. Our support starts with a detailed profile analysis. This means we dive deep into the student's stats and experiences. This then allows us to create a well-balanced list of target, safety, and reach schools. We also help build strong resumes and obtain letters of recommendation from the right recommenders. Our services continue through the interview process and include waitlist strategy support, scholarship assistance. We're with you until you receive your acceptances. Our admissions counselors, who are also writing experts, will brainstorm, outline, and edit your supplemental essays and personal statements until they are perfect. These essays showcase the best aspects of our students, connecting their life journeys with each school that they are applying to. I should say that each theme of each school they're applying to. Whether it's your main application or scholarship essays, we offer unlimited edits. Overall, our goal is to build the perfect candidate and application. That's why we do these webinars. That's why we share this information. We use every tool in our skill set to ensure the products we create with our students stand out from the rest. We're super excited to have you here. I know you're not here to hear me speak all night, so I'd love to pass it over to our panelists to introduce themselves and continue on with tonight's discussion. Mika, did you want to go first? You just happen to be there.
Sure, why not? Hi, I'm Mika MacDonald. I'm an LSAT tutor and an admissions consultant for Juris Education. I took the LSAT in 2011 twice, scoring 172, then a 179. I graduated from the University of Chicago in 2015, clerked for a bankruptcy judge in Delaware, and then worked as a corporate bankruptcy litigator for 5.5 years. Left the practice of law during COVID, and I have now been teaching full-time for about 2.5 years.
Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. My name is Erin Calloway. I am an admissions consultant with Juris. I've been working with them for the last 2 years. I am currently in law school. I am an evening part-time 4L student at American University, Washington College of Law here in our beautiful nation's capital. That means that I will graduate in May of 2025. I currently work full-time in the nonprofit sector, and I'm so grateful to be here and to share some of my insights with Mika. So thank you. Mika, you want to take it away?
Why not? I'll go first. Okay. Necessary components review, right? We are in the middle of November right now, which means the first round of decisions is starting or about to start for a lot of law schools. So as you finalize your application, you really, really want to make this a full checklist process, right? Go through your entire LSAC account piece by piece, go through the credential assembly service piece by piece, make sure that every letter of recommendation you need is already in. If they aren't, follow up with your recommenders as soon as possible. Make sure your transcripts are all valid and submitted in the valid, official form, not an unofficial transcript. Just make sure you review this completely. Especially recommenders. You don't want to have to wait 2 weeks to get a hold of a professor that's really busy around Christmas time. All right, turn it over to Erin.
Excellent points. And as we move forward, I also want to share that when you're uploading specific files, it's really important that you have a designated space on your laptop or computer, so that way you do not miss key important aspects of your application. And in particular, make sure that your file names are consistent, so it shows that you are organized in your approach to submission. So in addition to that, when you are applying to law school, you do not want to feel rushed, because if you feel rushed, you might make a mistake. And so we like to say, create an outline checklist to confirm each section is complete, but also, take an audit and make sure that there's no errors or omissions in any type of question or specific section of your application. Doing one final check before you hit send can save you from either potentially making it in the application cycle at a school or not. And so you set your timeline, so make sure that you have a complete application versus a rushed and early submission.
All right, so document accuracy is wildly important. Double check that your transcripts are in the valid format issued by your school and not an unofficial format. If they need to be digitally signed, make sure that they're correctly digitally signed in Adobe. Check for legibility, especially if you originally got a paper version and then scanned it up to your computer, because sometimes the scanners do not do perfect jobs. If you're going to retake the LSAT, right, make sure you tell the school that you are retaking and that you'd like them to delay a final choice on you until the second score comes in or following score comes in. I've had students before that knew they were going to retake and then just didn't tell the schools that they were applying to that was going to happen. And I think instead of getting waitlisted at certain places, they got outright rejections, right? So make sure you make the school aware of what you're doing. on your application forms, including your resume, make sure all your personal details and info are up to date. Make sure that your resume doesn't contain anything that's outdated. You can get dinged by that both at the admissions level and at the character and fitness review level. That's what I would say is the most important thing here. It's okay to miss a little detail when it comes to admissions officers because they're not going to deeply investigate you. But when you graduate law school, someone at the Board of Bar Examiners is going to deeply investigate you, and they will notice anything that was a major omission. So be as scrupulously accurate as you possibly can.
Yes, I completely agree. So when you are reviewing your personal statement, it's so important that you express your authentic self while also making sure that you have a compelling, consistent theme throughout your statement, but also application, which can include supplemental essays. It's important to start with a captivating opening and with an end that is strong, that reinforces your overall narrative, but also your overall goal, which is to be a practicing attorney. And so many students feel that they might have to have background experience in law to go to law school. That is not always the case. So telling your true story and passion for entering the legal field is the most important thing in writing your personal statement.
Okay, so enhancing your personal statement / writing a highly effective personal statement. So the biggest one I see lots of students make is that they sort of recount their resume from a high-level perspective, which is pointless because they have your resume and they don't need you to recount it, right? You want to think about themes, values, and motivations, and you want to use specific experiences from your own life that illustrate those things, right? The idea of show, don't tell. So when you're thinking about writing your personal statement, think about what you want to emphasize, and then think about what actual instances from your life are good examples of this, or things that changed you in some way that helped build your motivation towards law school. Keep your voice authentic, and I'll emphasize don't go insane with people reviewing and editing your stuff, okay? 10 cooks is too many cooks, right? There's a very clear Adult Swim long form short about that fact. If you have people that are editors, keep that number low. Reviewers and commenters can be high. But once 10 different people are directly editing your stuff, your voice starts to disappear, right? So find 1 or 2 good editors, right? Someone that you know that's good at writing, or an admissions counselor, for example, and then send your stuff out to get reviewed by friends. But again, don't take edits from 10 different people. Your voice will disappear completely. Don't be cliched. There are a lot of law school cliches and law school application cliches, and you should think about those. I would say especially grandstanding, right? Making sort of elaborate claims about what you are going to do in the future doesn't sell nearly as well as stories about your past that indicate who you'll be in the future, right? Proper grammar, punctuation, and formatting. We have a little bit about formatting later on, so I won't overdo it right now. But what I will say is looking unprofessional is not a good look when you're applying to a professional school, right? And law schools are professional schools. So don't be messing around with fonts halfway through. Make sure your periods, your commas are where they need to be, your apostrophes are where to be. Go through by hand and do not rely on just spell check and other computer-based assistance. Read through every line of your personal statement aloud and ask if it sounds weird when you say it aloud. Feedback, right? Again, I'll emphasize, have a small number of editors. Feel free to get feedback from as many people as possible. And the last one, I added this to the slide. because I will just emphasize, I can tell when you use ChatGPT. Everybody can tell when you use ChatGPT. It's not sneaky, and it's really not going to look good on an application. It's really not going to look good. I don't care what your stats are. If I were an admissions officer at Yale and you had a 40180, but you were clearly using ChatGPT to write your personal statement, I would bounce you 100%. So any sort of AI writing assistance should be avoided completely. It will shine through and it will lose you opportunities.
I agree. And so as you move forward in your application, the second item you should focus on is your resume, right? Some of you might not have a resume, some might already have a resume, but you have to make sure it's refined. So add any recent internships, jobs, relevant volunteerism, any other potential skills you might have gained during the last few seasons or school opportunities in your life. And it's also important to highlight, your accomplishments within specific metrics and outcomes. That could be learning a new language or publishing an article in a school newspaper, or say you trained to run a marathon. All of these specific accomplishments speak to your character and ability and qualities that you'll bring to the table as a law student and as a future lawyer. I think it's important to limit your resume to one page so it stays concise and focused, because again, this is just one part of your application. And when an admissions counselor is reviewing your package, they want to make sure that you're consistent across each section. And so you don't need a 5-page CV. A 1 to 1.5 page resume should be sufficient. We also like to share that Times New Roman is not very popular these days. And so unless it's specifically required, we recommend a sans serif font. Also, it's important to indent paragraphs and make sure that you use consistent styles, particularly if you're going to use bullets, right? The mix of circular bullets versus square are very obvious, and it shows that you might not have a keen attention to detail if the patterns are mismatching. So again, update your resume or start fresh, and then utilize those reviewers to give you that feedback.
So this is where I pop back in and see if we have any questions in the chat, which I've been following along the chat. There's a ton of really great questions. I think what we should do is we'll go over a few of them and then continue on in the presentation. We can save the rest for the end. Just I want to be mindful of time. Okay, there we go. More questions coming in. This is really awesome. Let's go to the beginning. So somebody is asking, so should we just wait to submit the application altogether if we are planning to retake the LSAT?
I'm not sure what Mika's advice would be. I have the preference of waiting. It just depends on when your LSAT retake exam is. I have a couple students that have decided to take the LSAT again in January. And so we've discussed, and they're going to wait to submit their application until they obtain their score. But then again, it depends on your own GPA and past LSAT scores. What do you think, Mika? And we might disagree.
I don't think that there's anything wrong with waiting. I guess what I always think about it is, if you are going to apply then, maybe apply to the schools that you think you already have a high chance of acceptance at. Because effectively what you're doing if you apply and tell schools to wait is you're saying, waitlist me right now, which is kind of not very different than just applying later. I don't think I have a particularly strong stance either way, but if you are going to do it, right, you need to tell them that that's what you want. You want them to delay their decision. Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Okay, so one more question. If reapplying, should I change my personal statement?
Yes, I think so. Particularly if you're applying to the same schools, they may review your last year's application. And so you want to make sure that your personal statement references potentially your previous submission, but also what you've done in the interim to improve your chances of getting in and to better yourself as a professional.
Yeah, I agree completely. They'll also find it weird, like, what did you spend the last year doing and why isn't it talked about in your personal statement anywhere, right? I think that would throw off some red flags in a way I don't think you want to. I would definitely rewrite it.
Okay, I know we said just these 2 questions, but there's a ton, which is really awesome. I love this discussion we're having. So I'd love to go over one more, I promise, and then we can get on with the rest of the presentation. Can we use ChatGPT for a rating? I was told by a professor to not use ChatGPT, but only for a review, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how strong is this essay? So is it safe to use ChatGPT to sort of gauge or evaluate the strength of a particular essay? What are your thoughts on that? Is it reliable at all?
I wouldn't trust ChatGPT's ratings because I think the way ChatGPT writes is awful and is very clearly awful. So I don't think you should use it as a rating tool because I don't think it actually offers you anything near a reliable rating of what humans enjoy reading. But I don't see how the school could ding you if you never ever edit it based on it. So if you want to do it, go right ahead.
I agree. It's all relative, and based on how GPT, I guess, essentially reviews, depends on if it can provide a human perspective. I would trust someone that you look up to review your personal statement and judge the essay based on that.
Yeah, I agree with Erin completely on that, 100%.
Well, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to let you both continue on and discuss tailoring your resume.
I'll just keep the back and forth going.
Sure.
All right. So, tailoring your resume. You want your resume to back up the sort of narrative and values that you're demonstrating in your personal statement. So I have students, for instance, that graduated, worked as a legal assistant or a paralegal for a few years, and then applied to law school. And they all have a great narrative, which is that they have deeply investigated what it's like to be a lawyer and are still choosing to become a lawyer, right? They have a certain level of credibility because of that. I have students that do lots of public interest and charity work in college and maybe even post-graduation if they've been working for a while, and they want to do public interest work post-graduation. And so their resume and their personal statement match up, and they really sell that message to admissions officers. What you really don't want to do is say you want to do public interest and have no public interest in your resume, right? You want to be honest and consistent because these admissions officers will notice if what you're saying seems to not be supported by your past actions. So think about it that way at the first big broad perspective. And then beyond that, emphasize the sort of things you could take away from those experiences that apply to law school or that demonstrate your values, right? So if you worked at a very intense, I don't know, multitasking sort of job, then you can spin a little story based on that, right? Just think about how you can pitch the skills you learned in one place as applying to you being a law student and a lawyer. Oh, I went too far. Sorry, Erika.
That's okay. And so with this, it's important to highlight opportunities with which you were a leader, because at the end of the day, when you are a barred attorney, you are called to be a leader in this field. And so we recommend students think about opportunities that they've had in leadership roles, whether that is student organizations or community service, and highlight that on your resume. If you're a non-traditional student like myself who worked full-time and obtained a master's before going to school, I highlighted leadership roles I had in the workforce sector. With this, if you've participated in any legal clinics, moot court, debate teams, or had opportunities to semi-negotiate or present or showcase public speaking skills, those are always important to put on your resume. I had one student who frequently spoke in their religious organization, which can still count, right? Captivating an audience and being confident relaying information, you can still highlight that. Again, as Mika mentioned, volunteer work, right? It showcases your values and goals. Law school highly recommends students work with legal aid and groups or even public interest groups, in part because in some state jurisdictions, you'll be required to provide pro bono legal services to keep up with your bar license. And so with that, they want to make sure that you're committed to helping individuals in the community that might need free legal services. And again, whatever you end up mentioning in regard to your past work experience or extracurriculars, always make sure it ties back to the law and advocacy. So again, you don't have to have direct legal experience, but tie it into why you want to be an attorney and how you can use those transferable skills to be successful in the field.
So recommendation letters. Hopefully, most of you have already chosen recommenders or you're applying at a future time. But if you haven't, you really need to think about, number one, what's required, and then number two, who is going to be a good recommender. So most of the time you need at least 2 academic recommenders, right? That means professor, dean, someone in the education position at your undergrad or at a school you attended, right? Preferably, you have been active in their class, you have been to their office hours some, they know you a little bit, right? You're not just someone who got an A, you're someone who got an A and they talk to and kind of know a bit, right? The more that they can testify to who you are as a person and not just as a letter grade, the better. And with non-academic recommenders, most people choose professional. So think about someone that you've worked for that knows you well and can testify to how well you've done in that sort of situation. If you're a student that has not held a job before, or at least like a full-time job where you develop that sort of relationship with a boss, think about a personal recommender who can talk about who you are and write well, right? That's always a good backstop, right? Someone who truly knows you well and can write a really good recommendation letter. So that's kind of the priority levels there. You want them to write more than just this person is very good at this or this person was great in my class, right? Hopefully when you reach out to them, you also start a little dialogue and you give them some context about what your goals are, why law school matters to you, why you chose them as a recommender, right? But try to engage in a little bit of dialogue, not just, please write me a recommendation letter. I do strongly recommend that you check the box that you do not want to read recommenders' letters when they're uploaded to LSAC. You are allowed, but broadly speaking, it's a little bit frowned on. So you can't read the letter once it's written, but you can provide context before it's written. And that's really how you help guide your recommenders in terms of what you'd like them to say. And follow up, right? Be polite, but at least a few weeks ahead of when you really need them to get it in, follow up. And if you don't hear from them, don't wait 2 more weeks to follow up. Now you're a week before the deadline. You haven't heard from the professor. You don't even know if they can get it done in a week. Be polite, but a little bit aggressive in following up, right? These deadlines matter for you. And professors are busy people, and oftentimes things will slide unless you push it to the forefront. So be polite, but be a little aggressive in following up.
I agree. And with that, it's always important that you send a thank you note. And that can be a thank you email or a handwritten note. But again, it just shows your gratitude and appreciation because, again, these letters are significant and will highly impact your opportunity to be admitted into law school. So depending on your list of schools with which you're applying, it's really important that you check in with admissions offices to ensure all materials have been received. Don't hesitate to ask questions about their timeline for decisions or any additional requirements. Each school is different, and given that we recommend students apply to at least 7 to 15 schools, I recommend you create kind of a document that helps you manage the unique timelines based on each school and all of their potential additional requirements. They may have questions in regards to your application, so you want to make sure that you remember who you spoke with, what they asked for, and the deadline for submitting that additional material. Also, if you do get waitlisted, please don't give up. You can always write a letter of continued interest. That is something that we do as admissions consultants, right? We can help advise students in writing their expressed, enthusiasm and passion for potentially committing to that said law school. Mika, thank you for adding in that note. How you wrote a letter of continued interest for University of Chicago.
4.
You wrote
once a month.
Okay.
Mhm.
Do you want to share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, I was a super splitter. I had a 3.25 undergraduate GPA and a 179 LSAT, which obviously is way below the GPA medians at I don't even know at this point, top 100 schools, top 75. But I really wanted to go to U Chicago. I early decisioned there and got waitlisted. And I just wrote one letter a month. Letters about the school, a letter, I think, about myself and I was studying abroad in China. Not studying abroad, I was living in Beijing that year. I wrote about the things I cared about doing with my law degree. So I just wrote 4 one-page letters once a month, and I got in April off the wait list. So you can get off the wait list. Be persistent. My thought process has always been that they knew my name, right? They were looking at their last round of waitlist admits. They wanted maybe a high GPA or a high LSAT, and they realized my GPA wouldn't hurt anything. And they remembered me because I'd never stopped writing. So that's my thought process. It can work.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thanks,
So,
Erin.
yes, you can get off the wait list.
Mhm.
So, remain committed and resilient. I see the clapping in the chat. Thank you very much. So again, don't be afraid to express that continued interest in specific schools.
One thing I want to step in with that slide. I rarely do this, but I would love to throw out that U Chicago is a T3 school. So this strategy that they just mentioned works. It really, really does work with the top schools. So if you didn't underline that in your notes, underline, highlight, and just picture Mika's face getting into that school after 4 letters of continued interest.
Mm-hmm. So prioritizing self-care. This definitely applies in full force during LSAT studies. I am constantly telling my students to not burn out, to not push themselves insanely. For example, people that like to work 7 days a week, you're going to hate whatever you're doing after a few months. You just will. I've worked 7 days a week for months at a time as an attorney, and I hated it. By the end, didn't matter how fascinating the case was, how cool the work I was doing was, I was just burnt out. So have genuine self-care routines. That might be mindfulness activities, that might be exercise activities, that might be relaxing with friends. But make sure that you actually continue to do those things. Don't obsess just about this. That's how you burn out. And yeah, the normal stuff, sleep, nutrition, exercise will help you feel better, especially exercise. And that's also something that I advocate people get into an exercise routine before you attend law school, because then you'll really need the stress and anxiety relief from it. But this is a good time to either build on those habits or establish them. Yeah.
That is so true. I agree. So common pitfalls to avoid. Number one, submitting an application with proofreading errors. You can have an amazing LSAT score and GPA, but they will not admit you if there are errors in any of your documents. So please, please, please review everything, and not just once or twice, but I would do it 3 times and have at least a second set of eyes. Also, not everyone confirms that all required documents are uploaded. Sometimes your schools or previous schools are behind in uploading or submitting transcripts. It's okay to ping them again and reach out to the registrar. You are your own advocate, and so you need to advocate for yourself if you are waiting on documentation. Mm-hmm. Some schools have very specific instructions. They might require 2 essays versus another school that has an optional essay. And some schools might request an addendum, especially if you had a lower GPA. Use that as an opportunity to explain yourself and how you grew from that learning season, or from that one semester where you struggled in a particular area. Don't just rely on spell check to thoroughly review. We've discussed this already. Make sure that you are articulate and consistent in your narrative, especially if you are applying again the following year, right? Make sure that you review your last application materials, and so that they flow into this upcoming cycle. And also explain what you've currently been doing to show that recommitment to entering the legal field. And again, communicate with your recommenders, right? There are deadlines. I like to give a pre-deadline that's not the accurate deadline for my clients' recommenders, just because things can happen. A professor or a former supervisor can get sick, or maybe they have technical glitches. You don't want any of that impacting your application. So
I love that idea. Yeah, that is very smart. If there's one thing that's likely to delay your application, it's a letter of recommendation not being in. That is the biggest, in my experience with hundreds of students at this point, that is the biggest risk in terms of a delay.
Yes.
All right, so you got everything, you've double checked, you have your letters in, right? Gather the final necessary information. Just as Aaron just pointed out, double check that all of the school's specific requirements are being met, right? Essay-wise, formatting-wise, length-wise, everything should follow exactly what they have asked for. It doesn't look good when you do something that they didn't ask for. I can infer, like someone might infer from that when you become a lawyer, you might do stuff that the court didn't ask for. So treat it that way, right? Do exactly as you were asked to do. Application fees, right? If you don't have a fee waiver involved, make sure that you have sufficient funds at hand to pay all of those application fees as you send them out. I have had students been like, oh God, this is like $1,400. I didn't have that in my debit account. And, make sure you plan ahead, because these things are very expensive. And finally, the specific deadlines. Hopefully you are applying well in advance of a deadline from the school. Instead, you're applying shortly after the application period opens, or well before their first round of admissions. But remember, if you go to like law school data, lsd.com, for example, you can see when schools started doing their rounds of admittances last year, which does kind of indicate a hard deadline if you want to be in a certain round. And some schools do their first rounds in late November. Some schools don't do their first round until January. So you might want to check with respect to the schools you're applying to so that you know you are getting this stuff in time to be considered for each round of admissions. Yeah.
Great point. And so after you've, completed your application, make sure you have a comprehensive review. Things need to be complete and accurate and properly formatted. Again, accurate. Again, admissions counselors are going to thoroughly review your application, but it's a bar examiner that will go back and highly audit everything you've submitted to the school, but also will review past things in your life experience. So make sure that you are honest and accurate with regards to your application. And then when you hit send, you should receive confirmation emails. Oh my goodness, not all applicants realize that that is a part of the process. Make sure you receive them. If you did not receive them, check your spam or junk folder. And if not, go back into the portal and make sure, nothing was held up when you hit that button. You could have had poor Wi-Fi or cellular service. Again, things can happen. So make sure you receive those confirmation emails.
So, final steps, off to the great unknown. Look, there are definitely lots of things that you can do to help prep for law school. I don't do 1L prep here at Juris, but I do know that there are people that do 1L prep work for Juris. You should certainly look into any sort of books or pre-law reading you would like to do. Some people like to go and find a bunch of horn books and start reading them. I don't think that accelerates your legal knowledge that much, especially because you won't have the framework for understanding it. But there are also a lot of great books out there about the legal profession or about the origin and evolution of common law in the United States or statutory law in the United States. Those sort of things might actually be very helpful to read because they can help you build that grounding for understanding how the legal system and common law in the US work. But you don't have to rush yourself on that stuff. Honestly, I did a little bit of, I casually read 2 or 3 books before law school about the law. That was it. And I did just fine once I got to law school. So don't think that you need to start studying for law school before you even get there. Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
So before we move into our Q&A, we have a ton of questions in the chat. We are going to try and answer as many of them as possible. There are quite a few. So if by chance you don't get your question answered, please either book a consultation and speak to one of our admissions counselors or email us and we'll try and get an answer for you. But in terms of the QR code on this screen, we'd love your feedback. We absolutely take this stuff into consideration. So if there's something you want to tell us, if you want us to do another resume on a particular topic, we are open and we'd love to hear from you. It takes a second, but it means the world to us. And it just allows us to offer better guidance and just continue developing these sessions. So please consider it. Now, in terms of the Q&A, I'd love to hop right in. I think answering as many questions as possible. There's a couple of questions in here that I'm going to summarize. So we have a ton of non-traditional students in this particular session, which is absolutely incredible. We do have a webinar coming up that is dedicated to non-traditional students applying. So we highly encourage you to check that out. But a lot of the questions that we're getting are in terms of resumes. So I think that's where we should start. So we were talking about a resume being a page, maybe to a page and a half. Is this the same recommended length for non-traditional students or individuals who just have a ton of work experience? And I'd love to open this up to both of you.
Sure. So Mika, I'll jump in.
Go
So
ahead.
thank you so much for the non-traditional applicant questions. I think on a case-by-case basis, you should make that decision. So if you've worked extensively, and I can reference my own classmates. I have classmates who are in their 60s right now who are going to law school as a second career. One is a physician. Her resume was 3 pages long, but that was relevant to her story and why she was applying to law school. So if you think your work career and the amount of detail that you want to express is relevant to your drive to be an attorney, then submit that resume. If you can break down the resume from 5 pages to 3, that's great, right? We don't need 10 items of duties at each position that you've held. But again, if you feel that it's relevant to your story, then submit the whole thing. What do you think,
Yeah.
Mika?
I completely agree with Erin. I think it depends on your story, the amount of work experience you have, how long you've been out of school, if you have publications or other special items of interest that should be on a resume. So I would just use your judgment on that. I would say for KJDs, most of you should do one page. It is rare that a KJD has enough stuff to warrant rolling over to a second page. But for postgraduates with work experience, I think it's more than justified a lot of the time.
Amazing. Thank you. And hopefully that answered the question thoroughly enough. If it didn't, please let us know, and I'm sure we can elaborate. So I'd love to answer this one real quick because I think you sparked someone's interest. Is there a particular reason people don't necessarily use Times New Roman anymore?
Yeah, I can talk about this at length. So what I can say is serif fonts are harder to read, especially on computer screens, and they are especially difficult for people with visual impairments or dyslexia. So that alone is one reason to shift off of them. Number 2, and as this article kind of says, Times New Roman is not so much a font choice as the absence of a font choice, and it indicates total apathy to the typography of what you're doing. Number 3, the spacing and sizing of Times New Roman was built for 1950s newspapers. It is meant to number 1, not be double or 1.5 space. It's designed to be jammed together. And because of that, if you compare it to a standard serif font, what you'll actually find is that the letters in Times New Roman are about 3/4 the size of a completely same sized font from a sans serif family. So legibility alone is increased because the actual text is bigger, even though it's the same font size. And then I'll give you the evidentiary stuff. The Seventh Circuit actively advises people to not use Times New Roman. An increasing number of courts are banning it or requiring that you use a designated serif font or sans serif font that they prefer. The Supreme Court does not allow you to use Times New Roman. They want you to use a Century family font. That's the only things that they allow. Basically, everyone that does typography hates Times New Roman and have for a long time, and that's finally percolating out everywhere. But I can definitely confirm that in the legal industry now, it is to use Times New Roman, especially in court pleadings, unless the judge has a specific preference for it. Mm-hmm.
There you go. And no,
that was
you
a
know
rant.
what? That question was asked about 3 times, which I did not see up until now. So this is fantastic. And truthfully, I didn't even know that, which is actually very interesting. So this is a really great question, and I was hoping maybe you could answer it briefly because we have about 7 minutes and maybe 20 questions. So how should I frame a deficient GPA in an addendum, given 8 years of successful work experience and now feeling confident in overcoming my mental health struggles to apply now? So I think this is about just to summarize, just how to frame an addendum especially when somebody maybe had a lower GPA in their undergrad, and it looks like, yes, 8 years of work experience since.
So if you're post-grad, obviously the work experience should, in an ideal world, make the GPA less relevant. We don't live in that world, unfortunately, because of how the ranking system for law schools work. I think addendums about GPA should point to very specific things, factors that lowered your GPA, whether that's death in the family stuff going on, having to take care of a sick relative, mental health problems. All of those things are valid things to talk about, but you should have something specific to talk about. I'll say even I have a student that was a D1 baseball player coming in and didn't care about his academics for a year and a half, but then he jammed out basically 4.0s the rest of college. And it was honest of him to say, I wanted to go pro, then I realized I couldn't, and I got serious about my academics. And I think that worked because it was very direct, very honest, and he did get very serious about his academics. So be specific and be kind of short. Don't write 2 pages. Now you're just getting really, really defensive. Just tell them what happened, identify the issue, and explain how you resolved it. Yeah.
I agree. I completely agree.
Awesome. Okay. We're going to keep the ball rolling. This is a really great question. Matt P asks us, if you could describe the objective of a personal statement in 1 sentence, what would it be?
I would
Make
say
the admissions off. Oh, go ahead. You go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mika. You're good.
Make the admissions officer want you at their school. That means academics. That means the personality. That means being part of the law school community. That means the likelihood you'll be a successful alumni. But overall, it's make the admissions officer want you to be at their school. And I always emphasize a lot of that starts with personality. If your stuff is super dry and they have no idea what you like as a person, they're going to hesitate to let you into their school, because personality does matter. And these institutions are small, right? 100 to 200 lawyers per class. That's a very small group of people. So they care about that a lot. All right, I'll turn it over to Erin. Sorry, long answer.
No, that's so true. I was going to say your personal statement is about your values and personality, right? They can't pick up on that based on your LSAT score and your GPA or even your resume for that matter. This is the time to let your authentic self shine. You can reference those things, but again, it's what you value, your character and personality, which will make them want or not want you at their school.
Awesome.
100%.
Okay, so we have a ton of questions. I think I will try and just pick through them a little more. I'm so sorry to everyone. Again, please, we recommend booking a one-on-one if your question does not get answered, or if you'd like to learn more about who we are. Let's go through. Okay, so this one is actually in regards to letters of recommendation. Should recommendations letters be specific to the university or drafted as a general recommendation?
General recommendation. I would be surprised if your recommenders will write 10 separate letters for you. Like, that's a lot of time investment on their part. I don't think anyone expects a school-specific one. If one of your recommenders went to one of the law schools that you're applying to, yeah, ask them if they might, ham it up in that letter, particularly do one extra one. But I would not go to professor and say, could you write 12 different letters of recommendation for 12 schools? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's way too much. Way too much.
Awesome. Okay, so this is an interesting question. Well, they're all very interesting, but does the canceled LSAT score look bad? So Isabella, I said she was sick for her last LSAT and purchased score preview because she was unsure of how she'd perform. She was hoping to write an addendum explaining this. Isabella, can I ask you, have you been on this webinar before? Because I feel like this individual I remember, if I'm not wrong, was on this webinar, not this particular webinar, but on a webinar, and she was taking an LSAT a few days later. So if that's you, we're so sorry to hear that. And I recognize the name, so I'm hoping it's the same person.
New here, she said.
Okay.
I honestly struggle answering questions like these. At the end of the day, I feel like what matters is the trend that your scores are setting. If I'm an admissions officer and I see a 154 cancel 154, that's going to lower my opinion of it, because it meant that you took 2 more times and didn't move up at all, right? On the other hand, if you have a 154 cancel 160, I'm going to have the exact opposite opinion. I'll go, oh, this person doubled down, worked hard, and improved. That's the sort of person I want in my law school, because I know that they worked hard and improved. So I don't think the cancellation matters insofar as the trend matters. That's what I would kind of say to it.
Yes, that is so true. And again, admissions counselors review your application holistically. So it's that pattern on top of all the other items you're submitting. If you want to write an addendum about it, you certainly can. You're not the first person who's had to cancel their LSAT score, right? Like that's not, I wouldn't say it's super common, but it's not infrequent either, right? Things happen. So.
Okay, one last question. If we are reapplying, should we get our academic recommenders to rewrite the letters? And I'd love to add on to this question, again, going back to the fact that it seems like we have a ton of questions around letters of rec. What about people who have maybe been in the workforce? Should they still recommend, or should they still reach out to professors for these letters of rec, or could an employer write one?
An employer can certainly write one, right? I think it's a mix. It just depends on your own personal situation. I had 2 past employers write letters for me and 1 professor, and I ended up picking, which letters I wanted to go to which schools. If you feel that there's been a substantial time period between when the letters were written in your application, maybe then ask 1 professor or 1 past supervisor to write an updated letter, right? Having maybe a older one versus a newer one might be helpful. But what do you think, Mika?
I think that absolutely makes sense. The other thing I would be careful of is some schools do require 2 academic recommenders. Like it's a hard requirement, unfortunately. That's not every school, I think, but it is a fair number. So I would plan to get 2 academic letters unless you're certain that none of your schools require 2. I will say, just from knowing academics, like if you reach out to a professor you did great for 8 years ago and say, hey, I'm applying to law school, I need academic letters of recommendation, could you please write one? They will absolutely write. Well, most of them will say, yeah, of course, I'll help you out. Like they get it. Right? They went to grad school too. They had to deal with the letters of recommendation process and when they applied to become professors. So, yeah, I guess that's my point of view here.
Amazing. So we are actually past the hour, so I'd love to wrap up tonight's discussion. There's several questions in here regarding resumes and resume format. We actually have downloads on our website of templates you can use for resumes. So it's absolutely a free tool. I can include it in the follow-up that'll have this recording as well. There's a ton of questions regarding sort of how that could look and bullet points and fonts and whatnot. So we're going to make sure that we include that as well. With that being said, Aaron, Mika, excuse me, Aaron, Mika, thank you both for being here tonight. Thank you for your words of encouragement. Thank you for all your knowledge. To our wonderful audience at home, thank you for being so engaged. Thank you for being with here tonight. And we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. We have these weekly. Every week, it's a new topic, all about law school admissions and different aspects of it. So if you haven't already subscribed to our newsletter, I recommend you do so. Each week, you'll get a reminder of what's coming up, and hopefully we'll see you next week.